Justice Gorsuch. Justice Kavanaugh.
If you prevail here, I just want to pick up on what brokers will need to do. So you prevail here, then you're counsel to a broker, say, and the broker is worried about the issue the Wall Street Journal focused on yesterday, the English language proficiency of drivers who can't read signs, okay? And so the broker says, I don't want to select a carrier that hires drivers that are not proficient in English language. How do they do that? And do they need to do that? And how do they do that? Because that's a lot of the current discussion is there are a lot of different issues, but that's one that's currently in the current events.
So complicated question. I'd probably give them a pretty long memo. And, I'd start by saying I'm not sure these English language requirements are really sort of safety regulations with respect to motor vehicles. And maybe they are. But I think that's a debatable question sort of at the threshold.
Well, why not? If you can't read, if you're hiring drivers who can't read the signs, that seems like a safety issue.
If you say so. I
assume that's true.
Okay, assume that's true. Then I got to I want to address whether I'm violating some other federal law by discriminating on the basis of English language proficiency. And I haven't sort of thought all that through, but it's not obvious to me that you can do that. But assuming you can.
Well, the federal government now tests for that. For the drivers.
Yeah, I bet that's being challenged somewhere. But let's assume that, we're on to the last part of my memo. We'll assume that that's also legal. Then I would say, okay, you can use large carriers, but if you do, make sure that they have an adequate testing program. And if you do, you're done. And the carriers will have every incentive to have that themselves because everybody thinks the carriers are liable. So if we don't have problems with the two threshold questions, then the carriers are going to have to do it. So the brokers should be in a pretty good position. They just have to hire carriers that actually have a reasonable policy for dealing with that. And if they want to have smaller carriers, that's great. But they just need to.
Same for, let's say, drug use.
Yeah.
They're asking the carriers, they got to get something from the carriers that say we're checking our drivers for drug use, alcohol background, safety checks, prior accidents, all that.
Right, but what you don't want them to do is not even ask that question and then hire somebody who's cheaper and then, because, one of the reasons I think that you do want them to have some duty of care in these circumstances is this is a margin business.
Yeah.
So if they don't have any sort of incentive to internalize any of the cost of not asking the question, they really have no good reason to ask the question. They want to hire the cheapest carrier.
So the real world effect, again, and I think this may help your position, so this is not a hostile question, is the brokers are going to be really digging into the carriers' safety background checks of drivers if you prevail in this case. And that, I don't think you should shy away from that. I just want to make sure that's what you think is going to happen.
Yeah, but I think I worry a little bit about digging into because in fairness,
they don't want to get sued for millions of dollars, so they should dig in, shouldn't they? If you're their counsel,
I'd tell them as their counsel, I'd probably say out of an abundance of caution, dig in. But I would also say I wouldn't be alarmist about this because the carriers. Everybody agrees the carriers are going to have to do this. Mm-hmm. And so as long as you're not hiring fly-by-night carriers who aren't doing it and have the minimum $750,000 of insurance, and you can hire small, small is beautiful if they do it right. But you do have to sort of ask those questions and make sure that, they're in a position where they're doing everything they can. And then if you do that, I would think the broker is not going to have a problem if it's asking the hard questions of the carrier.
Thank you.